Well, hey everyone, John Wagnon here. This is DevCentral Connects, and it's great to see all of you out there in the DevCentral community and our F5 customer base. And we just really appreciate your time here today. Normally we have our DevCentral Connects, and we talk about a lot of DevCentral topics, and we do this every Thursday. So we look forward to continuing to do this live stream event. But today we have a really special topic that we're going to talk about. But before I get into that, I just wanted to talk about community for a quick second. And community is who we are. We celebrate our successes together. We work through our challenges together. We push each other to be better. We encourage one another. And that's what community is all about. And so you probably have seen that that F5, the BigIP, has a vulnerability that was just released. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So we have the best and the brightest that F5 has to offer to talk about this and get into the details of what this is and how you can help yourself, how you can fix, mitigate, all of that kind of thing. So we are streaming live on Facebook and on YouTube and on LinkedIn and on Periscope, and we will interact with you. So as you provide or as you type in comments, we will be here to answer those. Maybe we'll highlight them on the show even, right? So anyway, so feel free to comment with us. We want to interact with you. We want to engage with you, and we want to walk down this road with you. So with that, I want to introduce our Executive Vice President and General Manager of our BigIP family of products, is Kara Sprague, and she's gonna have a few words to kind of get us started here today. So let me bring her on. And Kara, welcome, and thanks for being here today.
Thank you, John. And thank you to the F5 customers that are joining us today for this live Q&A session to discuss CVE 2020-5902. My name is Kara Sprague, and I'm the Executive Vice President and General Manager for the BigIP product line. In a few minutes, I'm going to be turning the mic over to Sarah Bodie, who's your moderator for the Q&A session, and our panel of BigIP experts, including Megazone, who's on our F5 CERT team, Jordan Zabor of the F5 Platform Security team, as well as Brian McHenry, the Director of our Global Solution Architects for Security. Now, because of the severity of this vulnerability, F5 is recommending that customers immediately apply the latest updates to all of their BigIP instances. If your BigIP has its TMUI exposed to the internet and is not running a patched version of the software, it may already be compromised, and you should follow your internal incident response procedures to ensure that you protect your data and your applications. If you cannot immediately update your BigIP instances, we're advising you to do several things. First, ensure that there's not open internet access to the TMUI interface. Second, limit that access to the TMUI for all users, including your internal users. And then finally, we've offered some additional mitigation and recommendations in our security advisory. Now note that those additional mitigation recommendations will continue to be updated as new threat vectors are discovered. And so already we've made a few updates since the last week. Now, we recognize the important role that BigIP plays in delivering and securing your applications. And we know that remediating this vulnerability may be disruptive to your business. F5 is here to support you throughout. We're here today to provide clarity and tactical help to customers in remediating this critical remote code execution vulnerability. We're going to start off answering questions that we know are in everybody's minds, but feel free to submit your own questions in the chat window, and we're going to do our best to answer them live. We might not get to all of the questions during today's session, but we will be providing answers in a Q&A page on DevCentral. With that, I'll hand it over to Sarah.
Thank you so much for the intro, Kara, and we really appreciate you being here with us today, so thank you. And want to give a shout out to John Wagnon. We appreciate you letting us take over your DevCentral Connect Security Sidebar. I think I speak for everybody here at F5 across the board that, given the severity of this vulnerability, we felt it was really pertinent to show up and to talk to you guys and to answer your questions. So as Kara said, feel free to enter your questions into the chat. We're going to go through some of the one-on-one of the vulnerability and kind of the top things that are on customers' minds that tend to be a lot of the questions that get into the support queue. And so we really want to cover those off first. We're going to be monitoring the chat, and we're going to float up the questions and answer them live. So let's jump right in. Megazone, can you please start off with just telling us the background of the vulnerability and some of the technical details?
No, certainly. So this is a very serious vulnerability, as I'm sure everyone's aware. It's a critical vulnerability, CVSS score of 10.0, which is as serious as it gets. It's a remote code execution vulnerability through the TMUI, the Traffic Management User Interface, which is the web management interface, or the configuration utility, as it's sometimes referred to, on the BigIP. The vulnerability basically allows for an attacker to successfully exploit it to gain equivalent of basically root level access on the device. So the attacker that comes in would be able to fully compromise the device and all the information present on the device.
That is a critical. Talk to us a little bit about the customer impact, the TMUI.
Okay. So this affects TMUI, as I said, which is generally listens on port 443, although it may listen on 8443 in some configurations, and it can also be customized. So if customers have changed the port number, they have to be aware of what port number they're listening on. The primary risk is, of course, if the TMUI has been exposed to the internet, which is not best practice, but there are some devices that have TMUI available to reach from the general public network that allows for public unauthenticated attackers to exploit this on devices that are still running vulnerable software, that don't have mitigations in place, etc. Even if it's not exposed to the public, however, we still encourage the customers to install the patched software. And if they cannot install the software, as you said, in a timely fashion because of the time I know it could take to do this, to put the mitigations in place, because there's always a concern about lateral pivot attacks where another device on the network is compromised would then allow you to laterally compromise the BigIP, as well as internal threats and large organizations. Sometimes you can't always trust everybody inside the firewall. So mitigating and patching the devices is really what we're encouraging everybody to do.
Right. So most critical risk is people with the traffic management user interface, the TMUI, exposed to the internet.
Absolutely.
Where attackers have been looking for it, right? But if you didn't have that exposed to the internet, it doesn't mean that you don't need to apply the patch and the updates that are in the patch because of the risk of internal pivoting. Brian, you talk to customers a lot. Are you finding that people are maybe not reacting to the severity of applying the patch because they think my TMUI wasn't exposed, so I've got some time, or I'm not at risk? And what do you say to them in that context?
Well, the noisy neighbor or squeaky wheel rule applies here. We don't often hear from customers that aren't concerned. So the customers we've talked to are all treating this with a high level of urgency. However, in the case where you might be in that group where you're not quite convinced of the risk involved, and maybe it's because, as Megazone mentioned, you think, oh, well, the GUI for my BigIP is only exposed on a trusted network or inside my firewall. Well, I'm here to tell you that you can't trust everybody inside the firewall, just as Megazone said. You really want to take a look at not just, is this not on the internet, but what extra practices have we taken to secure that user interface? Are we using strong authentication? Are we requiring potentially multi-factor against this UI, using third-party authentication servers? Or is this behind a bastion host? Is it somehow air-gapped from the rest of my network? What is the level of difficulty here? And where I would advise to take a closer look, many times we're very diligent about the dedicated management interface. And myself, as a former F5 customer, although that's some 13 years ago now, I can tell you that the management interface, we lock that down hard. Take a look at your self-IP configurations. So self-IP is there as a facility for routing mainly, but in many cases, we also enable other types of functions there, HA, crosstalk communications, as well as in some cases, being accessible for API access. And in that case, take a look at the port lockdown setting on your self-IP. This is really critical. The default for that is none. However, you may have turned it on to default or all, or maybe some custom setting. If port 443 or the web services are exposed on the self-IP per your configuration, you're going to want to take a very close look at what other services, what kind of access is available on that network where that self IP sits, because that's a potential risk. And that's really where you want to focus your attention, even if you feel like, hey, my management interface, the dedicated management interface, it's on a really locked down network, it's behind a bastion host, strong auth, all that. But self IPs are where, in most cases, if you're going to get bitten, even though you've done your best to lock down the dedicated management interface, self IP, focus some attention there. Take a look at those configs. If the defaults have been altered when those were set up, you might have an issue there, and it's worth close inspection.
Great points. Great points. Jordan, how would you advise customers to understand how they're vulnerable to this? I know we have some guidance out there, but I'd love it if you talked us through it.
Sure. So our guidance is in the form of our knowledge base article. We can say that the versions 11x, 12x, 13x, 14x, and 15x are vulnerable. That includes engineering hotfixes that are based on those versions. Patches right now are available for all those sustaining versions, as well as a major release 16.0, which was recently announced, has the fixes for this issue. As the other panelists have mentioned, really as far as exposure goes, depends on which networks and users have access to your TMUI. And I think it bears repeating that the ones that are exposed to the internet are really at most risk. But if you followed our long-standing guidance to restrict network access to your TMUI, your risk is significantly reduced, but it is not completely gone. And so it really becomes a function of which systems or users can access TMUI, as the other panelists have spoke to. One of the things to note is that there are an enormous amount of different POC scripts, there are Nmap scripts, there are Metasploit modules, and all kinds of different tools out in the ecosystem that will help you to detect this issue. Those will actually exploit the problem, so you want to be careful in doing so. But just know that if you look at our knowledge base article, if you don't see the version you're running in the column that says fixed, then it is vulnerable, regardless of what any of the POC scripts out there say. That's the truth is in the knowledge base article. Now we have an iHealth service that can help. It has a heuristic that can alert customers to various issues. For this issue specifically, we have a heuristic that can detect whether the version of BigIP software you're running is vulnerable. It can also help to determine if your management port and or self IPs have some of the settings that Brian had discussed earlier. And we can also look in the logs to see if different access attempts from publicly routable IP addresses have made connections to the system recently.
And you're getting into kind of the indicators of compromise. And if you guys haven't already seen that, those are listed in the current KB article, the knowledge base article on the F5 support site. And if anybody is looking for that, it's also linked from our f5.com main homepage. There's a link right under the top banner for all sorts of information about this vulnerability. Everything we have out inside of the S5 world about this vulnerability is all aggregated on that page off of f5.com. So you talked about proof of concept code being out in public, a Metasploit module, Nmap scripts to look for the vulnerability. We are seeing active attack campaigns targeting this vulnerability. When you package up the severity of the vulnerability with the public exploit code and the active attack campaigns, we are advising customers that have had their TMUI exposed on the internet since this vulnerability has been released to take an assumed breach posture. When you add up all of those metrics together, it is the most reasonable approach to assume that you've been breached and to follow your incident response procedures. So Brian, a lot of customers are taking that approach right now, and they're looking for guidance, and we heard that in the last call that we had. What would you advise customers to do if they're reaching out for help?
First of all, open a support case. Get engaged with our security incident response team, and that would be Megazone's team. They're incredibly well-equipped, deeply knowledgeable to help customers under duress. In this case, it's somewhat self-inflicted duress, a defect in our software, but they're also available when you're under attack. So first things first, go to the experts, go to the authoritative source. check the knowledge base article. If you still have questions, then open a support case and ask for the security incident response team. And if you're lucky, you'll get Megazone himself. Now that he's an internet celebrity. Second thing, and maybe most important, is like once you look at a knowledge base article, you should come away with one impression. Upgrade to the nearest patch version. So if you're on the 12x branch, there's a 12x patch. If you're on the 13x branch, there's a 13x patch that will represent minimum changes to the software. So we know many of our customers standardize on a particular version of software. So changing from, say, 12.1 to 13.1 is a very big lift as far as recertification, as far as standardization. Our new version schema that we've been instituting over the last couple of years actually helps to alleviate this. And we've listened to our customers closely here. We have the major version, the minor version, and then the next two dots are the maintenance and point release. So in a maintenance release, we're rolling up hot fixes. In a point release, where we've issued these patches for the CVE in question tonight, is only recent fixes. This is akin to a simple hot fix that you would apply in the past. So the point release really should represent minimal risk to you as an administrator or customer operating a BigIP. Very small changes to the software, only fixes should be in this point release. So and shouldn't affect your standardization because, again, it's a point release in the same branch that you're on. And every supported branch that we have today, I believe beginning with version 11, is that correct, Jordan? We have patches in version 11 all the way up through version 15. And as Kara mentioned at the top of the call, we just released a new major release, 16.0, which also includes the fix. So really any active branch, any supported branch of code you're on today has a point release that does address this, that fixes the problem and is not a workaround. Now, the other side of that is that we do know that this going to require a maintenance window. Even if the approval is easy to gain, you're still going to have to set up a maintenance window. And that's where you may want to look closer at the knowledge base article and look at the workarounds and mitigating actions that you can take to reduce your risk while making plans for a maintenance window.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. That's a really good point, Brian. I think the fact that it is an update within a .0 and it's not a major upgrade, which makes customers, rightfully nervous because of the time and effort it takes to do that. I think that's a really good point to clarify. The patch to remediate this vulnerability is an update. Let's talk a little bit about the mitigations that we offered up and the reason why we did that. And that's because we know it takes customers time, whether that's an update or not a full upgrade, which is not what we're asking customers to do, but even an update takes time. And what we don't want customers to do is be vulnerable in the time between the vulnerability being released, which was last week, and then being able to apply that update. And that is why we offered up mitigations. Can we talk a little bit through that? Because I know there's a little bit of confusion initially with customers on the difference between the fix and the mitigations. Anybody could take that.
I'll take this one, I guess. So the fix they're putting is the code fix, is the updating your software to one of the fixed versions. And as you said, somebody just said we have fixed versions for 11.652, 12.152, 13.134, 14.126, 15.104, and now 16.000. Not that I've had to repeat that. So all of our branches have a fix. Installing that completely fixes the situation. There are three. Basically, if people might be familiar with the term of attack chain, there are three levels to the vulnerability. There's a vulnerability. There's an issue with kind of a directory traversal in HTTPD, the Apache, which allows you for unauthenticated attackers to get past the authentication layer. Then there was a code issue in Tomcat, and then code issues in our code and the JSP on the back end. The code fix fixes all three layers. It addresses both the unauthenticated attackers, which is what most everyone's concerned about, as well as authenticated attackers, people who have a legitimate login to the BigIP, who are able to use this to do a privilege escalation to get higher levels, like to get root level access. So the fix, that's the code, updating your code, it fixes everything. The mitigations are, there's 3 mitigations in our security advisory. One of the most basic mitigations, which is just best practice, is restrict access to TMUI. You know, if you have a self IP, like your external self IP, use port lockdown. Don't allow traffic into TMUI on the public side of the box. Make sure your management is your interface, that physical interface on the box is on a protected LAN. You know, limit who can get to it, and that limits your threat surface. What the mitigations do is allow you then, once you've done, you know, you've restricted that access, the HTTPD mitigations we've had are designed to block the known exploits that still can reach those ports. I know I've seen some questions come in about, we've had to update that a couple of times. We initially published with a mitigation for HTTPD, which we believed blocked all the access. Unfortunately, we had a researcher, it was Team Aries, came in and to give them a little shout out, they pointed out to us that we had missed a vector. We updated it. Team Aries again came back when they had found the next morning, they found another vector. Since that was updated yesterday, we have not seen any new bypasses to the current mitigation which is now the 3rd that we have published as of yesterday, which has the semicolon pattern and the HHQLDB pattern in the mitigation that we published. We cannot promise it won't change again. The mitigations were always meant to be temporary until the updates could be performed on the systems, and the mitigations are in response to the evolving threat models that we have coming out there.
Yeah. So if you guys didn't hear that loud and clear, the mitigations were always designed to be temporary. We're going to continue to update them as the attack surface evolves. And again, they're temporary in place to buy you guys some time until you can get that update applied. One of the customers on the call, Josh, is asking if we have hardware that hit end of software development, i.e. the 3600, do we need to rely on the mitigations only?
I'll take that one.
Okay.
The answer is yes. You really can only rely on the mitigations. There is no software warranty for applying unsupported software to those devices. You're strictly, not in a supported territory if you were to apply a point release to a current end of software development piece of hardware. So this is, the 1600, 3600, 3900, 69, 8900 generation of hardware typically that's gone end of software development before these more recent versions were available. So it is not supported, unfortunately. So you'd rely on mitigations, in particular, securing that user interface on as isolated and trusted network as possible. And, certainly, I would recommend reaching out to your sales representative and talking about, what's the best path forward for us to get on some hardware that's better supported. That is a key milestone that everyone who owns BigIP hardware really should pay attention to, which is that end of software development milestone. It is possible to purchase extended support beyond that end of software development milestone. However, that extended support does not, create new support for subsequent versions of software, unfortunately.
Thank you. We want to give a shout out to Sebastian. He updated 28 devices today, and he is saying in the chat that he did all with Ansible. So
amazing.
A little virtual round of applause for you. Good job. Jordan, we updated the KB article day before yesterday, maybe. Days are blurring to us now. To include, right, no sleep. We updated the knowledge base article to include indicators of compromise because we realized, customers were needing this information. Can you share with us a little bit about what they can look for in the logs if they had that TMI user interface open and rightfully concerned about this right now?
Sure. So first, just want to preface this with something that we all know very well is that advanced attackers generally will work very hard to hide their tracks so that they can maintain system access. In those cases, and unfortunately, there may not be any noticeable indicators of compromise if you're dealing with advanced attackers. Our KB article certainly has things to look for. I would say in general, you want to be looking for, initially you want to be looking for any web requests that are making requests that include a ... semicolon or HSQLDB in the path. Those are, I would say, dead giveaways in terms of those are going to be malicious behavior and someone either attempting to exploit your system or has already compromised you. Some of the other generalized things that you can do is look for modifications to configuration that are unexpected, new users popping up on the system, modified users, password no longer works for admin, and any suspicious files or processes that can be found on the system. Our iHealth service has some heuristics that can help to detect a compromised system. And while it's not going to catch 100% of the cases, it can detect different malware and different processes that should not be running on the system.
And just to follow Jordan's comment there, you talk about comparing configuration differences, and one great way to do that is if you have BigIQ. If you're not aware, BigIQ does have some great functionality on board to help you do those configuration difference comparisons to give you some signals there. Also, we talked about Ansible being able to automate updates and the application of these patches. BigIQ is also a great tool for, if you have a large fleet of BigIP appliances, physical or virtual deployed, then you can certainly leverage BigIQ to help you through these maintenance windows in a more efficient fashion. And
Josh, you automated the updates. Oh, sorry. I was going to say, Josh, you automated the updates with Ansible is using BigIQ right now. So.
Yep.
Sebastian. That's a great point. I mean, like the mitigations and the updates can be applied if your systems are managed through BigIQ. BigIQ has the ability to upload TMSH or bash scripts and execute those on the managed devices, so you can apply the mitigations. And in terms of getting the final fix via software patch, you can do that with BigIQ as well.
And I'd like to kind of pivot off something that Jordan said. He mentioned iHealth, that it could help you define some things. There are updates being made to iHealth. We always are adding new heuristics to it. For those who haven't used iHealth, I really strongly encourage you to check it out. It's been there for several years now. iHealth.f5.com. For those who are familiar with BigIP, you can create what we call a quick view or QK view from the box. You can upload that to iHealth. That has all kinds of analysis in there, including a security tab, which can flag things. Like some of the things it would flag are things like public routable IPs, non-private IPs, connecting to the device through the control plane. That indicates you have an interface that's exposed to the internet, or at least is being through a NAT or something that's still exposed in some way. It'll flag some common configuration errors, things that are ports that are left open that we don't think should be, and so that's one way to help check to see if your devices might have been reached from the internet. We're working on trying to add some more of these specific things for this CVE to iHealth as we validate conditions. But some of the things are already in iHealth because they're common things, like files left on the box in directories where those files don't belong. Unusual files, dot files, hidden files. In directories where some of the exploits we've seen in the wild now are doing things like making tar balls out of the information on the box to be downloaded. And iHealth has caught those tar balls being left on the file system. So iHealth could help find compromised devices and also point out possible configuration issues in devices that may not have been compromised yet.
Yes, great point. We had a lot of customers in a prior conversation ask how they could figure out if the TMUI user interface was public on the internet, and our best answer for that is, beyond doing scanning and a lot of different tools that are out there, you could just do an iHealth check really quickly and figure that out. Cool. So another shout out to Josh here, and I think we're going to take your comment to PD. He's wondering when future versions of the BigIQ, will have utilities to help manage and report on the platform functions of the BigIP systems.
So not sure what this is specifically addressing in terms of platform functions. If that means, additional capabilities that BigIP has, if it means, are we going to be able to have better reporting on access policy manager or advanced WAF? Those are definitely in the works. In fact, the recent 7.1 release actually brings a number of functionalities as far as better management more broadly across all the capabilities on BigIP. Josh, if you wanted to follow up this question, maybe clarify what you mean by platform functions, we can try to answer that a little bit better.
Yeah, feel free to chat more. We'll pick it up. Martin is asking a question about when the workaround will be permanent. And I think that's a great question to answer in the context of explaining the difference between the mitigations and how they differ from the fix and the patch. We already talked about how the mitigations are intended to be temporary. So I'm going to punt this question to you, Jordan, and I assume that you're going to say the workarounds, the mitigations will not be permanent. But let's talk a little bit about the details there.
Sure. So as MZ said earlier, some of the initial mitigations that we provided were really about blocking this directory traversal form of the attack, and we'll say that's the ... semicolon. This is what we're seeing many attackers in the wild and how they're exploiting this vulnerability from an unauthenticated standpoint. Now, keep in mind that that initial mitigation and the temporary ones that we have now will only stop an unauthenticated attacker. They cannot stop an authenticated attacker. And what that means is someone with access to the TMUI, maybe of the role of guest, being able to exploit these vulnerabilities. This is something that's in our knowledge base article. That there's a little bit more details. The mitigations have changed over time because we're having to react in real time as we're seeing the situation progress and that additional vectors are coming up and we're seeing customers get compromised. And so we're trying to address that by updating the solution article. And I think that in all cases, at least our mitigations, that they should never be really considered something that is a permanent solution to this. Our permanent solution, as our recommendation has been said multiple times by now, is that we want to drive towards applying the software patch. Our software fit, like to compare the two, the mitigations really are about trying to stop that unauthenticated vector, trying to build in a kind of a gap for you to be able to take a breath and get the patch applied. But the software fixes are very different. Our software fixes do take into account the additional vectors and close off the gaps of both an authenticated and an unauthenticated attacker. So we included the ... semicolon as part of our original fixes, but that's certainly not everything. Our complete fix has TMUI changes such as command filtering, additional authorization checks, and the removal of some of these problematic code paths that introduced the vulnerability. We also ended up patching the Tomcat application server so that it would stop treating the semicolon as a special character, because that actually ended up being one of the problems that led to this. But as of today, we know of no ways to bypass the fixes that we've introduced in our software patches. And the software patch to BigIP is what all customers need to apply in order to address this TMUI vulnerability.
Yes.
As we had said before, I think it bears repeating, is that both the mitigation and the software patches can be applied either manually, like via iControl REST API or command line access, or if the systems are managed by a BigIQ, they can be pushed and applied to those managed devices.
Yeah. And that's the key there. The software patch to the BigIP is the ultimate recommendation that everybody needs to do as soon as possible. And we can't stress that enough. Yes, lock down external access to your traffic management user interface, which should never be public on the internet, right? Barring we know there's situations where customers are feeling like that's a necessity, but applying that underlying patch is paramount. Not to punt or deflect, but there's been a handful of critical remote code execution vulnerabilities released this week in very popular software that a lot of customers use, and that is common. It's the way software works, right? There's vulnerabilities all the time, and what you don't want to have happen is another say you don't have your traffic management interface exposed and you don't think you maybe need to patch quickly, but you've got another critical vulnerability that exists inside of your environment that somebody might be able to exploit and then pivot into your TMUI user interface. I've dealt with a lot of incidents of pivot attacks in my life. It happens. Some friend researchers of ours, Scientia, did a bunch of research earlier this year about the reality of patching inside of enterprises. And what they discovered was that the average enterprise patches criticals takes them 100 days on average to patch a critical. So we know industry standard is it takes a while, which is, again, why we, in best faith, created mitigations for you. But it doesn't mean leave those in place for a long time. It means get to that software patch as soon as possible. So a LinkedIn user is asking us, why don't we see upgraded visor functionality on the QK view anymore?
So I'll take that. It's, so I'm assuming, upgraded visor on iHealth when you upload the quick view. Honestly, we didn't see a lot of folks using that functionality, and it takes a fair amount of work actually to maintain and develop that functionality in iHealth. Rather than dump more work into something that people weren't using, we decided to discontinue it and actually take that same development effort and devote it to some other projects in the same area that will bring to bear, in the future. So things like programmatic bug scrubbing and other similar types of functionality. Not yet, sure, where that's going to come out. Which of our management platforms that we might introduce that on. But if you're interested in the roadmap for that type of functionality, and this sort of dovetails into what Josh B was asking earlier about BigIP platform functions, about better management for base stuff like HTTPD and LDAP and other things that are sort of in the user space and utility function of the BigIP platform. Those are good roadmap questions around what our management strategy and centralized management strategy is, and certainly would encourage you to kind of reach out if you're interested in those functionalities. Reach out to your sales team, and I'm sure they'll be happy to set up a call to discuss where those are coming from and take your feedback on where you think we should take it. How should we deliver this type of functionality? Great question, and great to see interest in that kind of capability. And you really should, talk to somebody that can give you a little bit more insight into the roadmap.
Great. We want to answer a question from Dean. With the notes about the Viprion B2250, does this include VCMP guests that are hosted in the Viprion B2250, or just the Viprion TMUI itself?
This is coming up. I went and looked up. There was a support case earlier on this, and the answer was that it only is the host OS because it's an issue between the TMOS interacting with the hardware directly. So it's the host is the concern, not the guests. I'll work on getting that updated in the security advisory to clarify that.
Okay, great.
But to be clear, the guests, if they have a TMUI, they are vulnerable.
Oh yeah, there's still.
Right, let's be clear about that. The host and the guests version, or the host and the guests TMUI instances are vulnerable. Oh, yeah. There may be some specific about notes that MZ is talking about, but certainly you have to treat both like they are vulnerable.
There's a note in the security advisory that there's an issue with 13.134 and the B2250. You need an engineering hotfix to install 13, with the fixed version of 13 on that platform. If you need 13, obviously 14.126, 15.104, the other versions that are fixed are perfectly fine on that blade. 13.134 for the host would require an engineering hotfix to work on that blade. But yes, host and guest are vulnerable.
Let's jump to Jose's question. He's asking if he makes SSH tunneling for HTTPS traffic and only work HTTPD with the local host address. Is that possible on the F5 platform?
So you're talking about an SSH tunnel into port 22 on the control plane, and then in forwarding your HTTP traffic over that. I think that would work. I mean, you just be going to localhost at that point, right? So it's like being on the box and doing command line browsing to localhost.
Yeah, this is something that we see in highly secured environments done occasionally. Using like loopback adapters to be able to restrict access to the HTTP daemon in unique ways. So this is something that's done. It's not. I won't say it's common, but it is done, and there's no reason it won't work. Now, the one caveat about things like this that I would remind people of: this is done out in user space and is not likely to be backed up. So your UCS file will not capture this. It will not get restored when you upgrade. So although this would survive a reboot, most likely it probably wouldn't survive an upgrade. So these types of user space functions often aren't durable through upgrade functionality, upgrade or update functions.
There is something else I really think we should point out here, though. This will not address the authenticated attacker because it's just another way to reach TMUI. So this would prevent, obviously, an unauthenticated attacker because they'd have to have SSH access, so they're not authenticated. But this would not protect you against somebody who has a legitimate login using this vulnerability to do a privilege escalation.
Right.
Good point.
And the other thing that you really want to do is, like what Brian said earlier, is to really audit and make sure your self IPs are locked down strictly and that you can't really get into the TMUI through any way, self IP or management. Because if you do this thing and it's very secure and your self IP has a allow all, then the problem still exists.
Okay, great. I think we've answered all the questions in the chat, which is amazing. We'll give it about another minute for you guys to ask any other questions before we wrap up. While we wait to see if anybody has any more questions, we do have some of the top questions that our F5 support team is fielding for customers right now. Maybe we can answer a couple of those and see if anybody else has anything else they want to ask.
Sure.
So one of those top questions is, I'm going to go through them. If HTTPD is configured to allow only certain addresses or networks, in that case, would those settings be enforced upon even if we use the self IP to access the TMUI? I think we've kind of approached this, but might be a good one to rehash.
If HTTP is configured to allow a certain network, so we've had some customers attempt to use the HTTPD allow directives to restrict access. We are aware that they tried to do this because the boxes they tried to do this on were compromised. So it did not work very well. At this time, we are not recommending that as a mitigation. We're sticking with the mitigations we have in our published security advisory. We are still looking into that. There may be a way to make that work better, but there was the ability to bypass the allow restrictions that were put into HTTPD in the cases we've seen it. So we something that we don't have a confidence level to recommend at this point.
Yeah.
Yes. And one of the reasons I want to debate that question to you is because I saw a tweet of yours earlier, MZ, where you were talking about people coming up with their own custom mitigations and us, not advising that a lot of time and effort went into making sure that those mitigations were solid. Yeah. And we've had customers come up with issues by trying to make their own. And so we really encourage everybody to follow the instructions in the KB article that is our source of truth. And if you have questions about that and you feel like you want to deviate, again, you can call support. And if you feel super strongly, I'm sure you can scream on the phone until you get MC, but we don't advise to do any sort of custom mitigations. Please follow what's in the KB article.
Yeah. And Ray, yes, it is. I was just wondering if anyone would notice it.
A Weird Al doll. That's great. That's great.
So I know there was a question up on the screen a moment ago. I think it was popped up and it went back away.
What to do if my box is compromised?
Yeah, that's the one. There is, the security advisory. Yep, there is this in a security advisory. There's a section, the indications of compromise, and that talks a bit about what to do, if you're unfortunately test positive. We have another article which is linked in the security advisory, which is probably the easiest way to find it. It's K11438344, considerations and guidance when you suspect a security compromise of a BigIP system. So it's a long title, but basically if you just Google F5 compromised or something, you'll probably find out your top hit. That will give you some directives on what to do. The short version is, and that's much more detailed in the article. Unfortunately, if your box has been compromised, the only way to be sure is basically to reinstall it cleanly from external media. You can't just do it in place update. You have to use external media of some kind to do an install, clean install. If you're gonna, if you are confident you have a UCS backup from before the box was compromised, you could restore from UCS. If you're not confident, then you really want to kind of cleanly configure it. However, the caveat being, any sensitive information that's shared on that box, your SSL certificates, your credentials, any kind of keys, anything that is a sensitive information must be considered to be compromised, because if you compromise the device, you have root access. Everything root can read, the attacker can read. So all your SSL certificates could have been grabbed. You should revoke them and reissue new ones. All your passwords should definitely be changed, especially if they're shared with any other devices. All that kind of sensitive information should be updated. So don't restore from a UCS that is just going to use the same stuff that was compromised, because they probably have your password file, right? And if they still have any way to get to the box, they could just brute force those passwords to give them enough time. Very, very highly likely. So yeah, you basically want to follow that document, but the short version is you're going to be doing a complete reinstall.
Yep. Security Advisory says the best thing I can do is update. Do you have guidance on the most efficient way to do that?
So that would be BigIQ or the use of Ansible or some other orchestration tool if you've got that set up. Sebastian Maniac in the chat is he's your go-to right now. He's got the record for a number of devices updated today, I believe at 28. So that really is, using automation and orchestration via BigIQ or through a third-party orchestration tool will be the most efficient way.
We should do a contest for customers, most updates in a day. Anybody who gets, well, I won't say that, t-shirts. How about LinkedIn user? If we already upgraded the units to 14.1.2.6, do we need to apply the workaround as well?
No.
So you don't have to apply the Apache location matches. We would still recommend strict isolation on any of the traffic management, traffic TMUI interfaces, management, and self IPs. That is as long-standing, always recommended. But as far as the location matching and that goes, you do not have to apply it after you have upgraded to a version that is fixed, which 14.126 is a fixed version.
Right.
I believe that same LinkedIn user is asking if all the UCS archive files and QKF files were gone, is that normal and expected?
Not that I know of. I believe that those should maintain. So if that's a problem for you, I would suggest a support case. I can't answer to the specifics now, but if that's a problem, support case is the right avenue for that.
Great. Okay. Shout out to Sebastian. He's got another 32 scheduled for tomorrow.
Good luck. Hopefully we're trying to get 28 today.
Yep. If there's put in another plug, Super NetOps. If you haven't taken that class, that's a great way to learn about Ansible and other automation orchestration tools that we have available. So, Sebastian seems like a hero, but and he totally is. But you too can be a hero. It's very easy to kind of get up and running with a lot of the automation and orchestration tools we have available. It's not as daunting as it sounds. We've got free online training, and we've got a number of Ansible cookbooks and all the things you need to get up and running without having to build it all up from scratch. So little plug there for how you can kind of get yourself ready for the world of automation and take advantage of it now when you need it most.
That is a really great point. It's very valuable skill sets for both yourself and your company. Compatibility matrix that shows.
This is same as the earlier question around the hype. Josh, I believe, asked. I have a 3600 and it doesn't support its end of software development. Doesn't support a fixed version. And again, and just to reiterate, in that case, unfortunately, there is nothing you can do other than take precautions about isolating your interfaces, applying the workarounds, and doing the best you can, because unfortunately, there is not a supported path forward for the older hardware.
Yeah, I would offer one way of hope is that if you're already running an unsupported platform, you're right, because it's end of life and you're still using some hardware that's not supported. We don't take any deliberate steps. F5 does not deliberately break upgrades. So it's not like we say, we're not going to let you use any software. So if your box supported like 12.1.3, it will probably run 12.1.5 too. Along the same lines. It's going to be at your risk. It's an unsupported situation. It's an unsupported environment, but you're already running an unsupported box. So how bad is it? But definitely upgrading to a supported platform would be the preferred option.
The guy from the support organization said that, so I've now absolved myself of your mild type of advice.
Configuration, but you're already running an unsupported box, so you're unsupporting an unsupported thing. So.
Fair enough.
Fair enough. Okay. I think we've answered all your questions. We really appreciate you guys joining us today and being so active in the conversation. This has been really great. I want to close it out before we give it back to John, since we hijacked his show today a little bit. Really want to reiterate for everybody that because of the severity of this vulnerability, F5 recommends that customers immediately apply all the latest patches to their BigIP instances. If your BigIP has its TMUI exposed to the internet and it is not running a patch version of the software, it may be compromised, and you should follow your internal incident response procedures. If you cannot immediately upgrade your BigIP, we advise you first and foremost to ensure that your TMUI is not exposed to the internet, especially not now and never ongoing in the future. You never want to expose your management ports publicly to the internet. That's something attackers are always after. Secondarily to that, once you've removed it from public internet access, you need to limit internal access to that TMUI. And then finally, apply any of the latest mitigations that we have offered in the current support article. Stay up to date with those, and only have those mitigations in line for a temporary period of time, because again, you want to get to that ultimate patch. So again, thank you for your time today. We really appreciate you guys joining us. Thank you, panelists. Good to talk to you guys. Thank you for sharing this info with customers. And I will hand it back to you, John. Thank you so much.
All righty. Well, thanks so much, Sarah, and the expert panel there at F5. Man, I just really appreciate everyone's advice and input, direction on this. Like I said at the beginning, we are a community. We are human first. We are all in this together, and we from F5 want you to know that we are walking this road with you. We are supporting you. We are encouraging you. We are here with any and all expertise that we have to come alongside you and fight this fight. So please know that we care about this, that we care about you, our customers, and our community members. So thanks for watching this today. I would say that if you want to watch it again, I suspect probably most viewers are maybe in like the Asia Pacific area right now. I don't know that for sure, but we will have another show tomorrow at 8 a.m. Pacific time, and we will run this again. So the same panelists, same topic, same chance to interact with us live, and who knows, you may get your questions highlighted, kind of like we did today, kind of like Sebastian Maniac, and man, what a workhorse, man. Go out there and automate that stuff and upgrade it all. It's a great job. So thanks again to everyone for watching. And like I said, we'll be back tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Pacific time to talk about the same thing. And as always, we will be here on DevCentral Connects every Thursday to connect with you, our community, and say we appreciate everything you do every day. So you guys have a great day. Thanks.